I always thought my family was like everyone else's, full of quirks, arguments, and moments of chaos that somehow still felt normal. But looking back, I realize I spent most of my life trying to convince myself of that. I'm 34 now, with 2 kids and a messy divorce behind me, but the cracks in my life didn't start there. They were always there, just barely noticeable until everything finally broke apart. Julie and I met when I was 26. I was working long hours at a small tech firm in Seattle, and she was a paralegal at a law firm downtown. I remember thinking she was out of my league, bright, confident, beautiful. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. We clicked immediately, and it wasn't long before we were inseparable. Everyone said we were perfect for each other, and for a while, I believed that too. We got married 2 years later, and for a time, it was everything I'd ever wanted. We bought a small house just outside the city, where life felt quieter, simpler. When our son, Liam, was born a year after the wedding, I thought my life was finally complete. I was exhausted and overwhelmed, sure, but in a good way. The kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to be the best dad and husband you can be. But things started to shift in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. Julie seemed distant after Liam was born. She was always tired, always distracted, and our conversations felt more like checklists. Did you pick up diapers? Don't forget the pediatrician's appointment. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of being new parents. We were both sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, so I figured it was just a phase. When our daughter, Emma, came along 2 years later, the distance between us only grew. I don't know exactly when I realized it, but somewhere along the way, Julie and I stopped being partners. We became 2 people sharing a house and raising kids, but the connection that had once been so strong felt like it had evaporated. I tried to talk to her about it, tried to ask if she was okay, if there was something I could do, but every time, she brushed it off. "I'm just tired, Mark." "It's nothing," she'd say, her eyes glued to her phone or the TV. That phone. I didn't think much of it at first, but Julie was always on it, texting, scrolling, laughing at things she never shared with me. I told myself it was harmless. Everyone's addicted to their phone these days, right? But then there were the little lies. She'd tell me she was running errands, but she'd be gone for hours. She started working late more often, and when I'd ask about it, her answers were always vague. "Just a lot of paperwork," she'd say, avoiding my eyes. I wanted to trust her. God, I wanted to trust her. But something wasn't sitting right. One night, I asked her outright if everything was okay between us. She looked at me like I'd asked the dumbest question in the world. "Of course it is," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Why wouldn't it be?" I let it go. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we were just stuck in a rut like every couple gets sometimes. But deep down, a voice I didn't want to listen to kept whispering that something was wrong. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday evening. I came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Julie and maybe have a rare quiet dinner together. The kids were at my mom's for the night, and I'd thought it was the perfect opportunity to reconnect. But when I walked into the house, it was eerily quiet. No TV, no music, nothing. Julie's car was in the driveway, so I figured she was upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I heard voices, soft, muted, but unmistakably 2 people. My stomach dropped. I told myself it could be nothing, that maybe she was on the phone, but my feet kept moving, carrying me toward the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the edge of the bed, her favorite blanket bunched up in the corner. And then I saw them. Julie was sitting on the bed, laughing softly, her hand resting on the arm of a man I didn't recognize. He was leaning in close, too close. They didn't see me right away. I was frozen in place, my brain struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. When Julie finally noticed me, her face went pale, and the smile vanished. The man straightened up, looking just as startled as she did. "Mark," she started, standing up quickly, but I didn't wait to hear whatever excuse she was about to give me. My body moved on its own, turning and walking out of the house before I could process what had just happened. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there. I drove for hours that night, my mind a storm of anger, confusion, and disbelief. How had it come to this? What had I missed? The cracks that had been there all along had finally split wide open, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. All I could think about was how everything I thought I knew about my life, about Julie, suddenly felt like a lie. I parked the car at some point, though I couldn't tell you where. It was one of those generic strip mall lots, the kind with a coffee shop on one side and a gym no one actually uses on the other. I just sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. My mind was racing, replaying what I'd seen in a loop I couldn't escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them on the bed, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world, like I didn't exist. I didn't want to believe it. There had to be some kind of explanation, some context I was missing. But no matter how I spun it in my head, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Julie had been lying to me. For how long? Weeks? Months? Longer? The thought of it made me feel sick. I don't know how long I sat there before my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julie. "Mark, please come home. We need to talk." The audacity of it made me laugh. A sharp, bitter sound that felt foreign coming from me. We needed to talk? She wanted to talk now? After everything? I ignored the message and stared out at the parking lot. People were coming and going, living their normal, oblivious lives while mine was falling apart. The phone buzzed again and again, until I finally grabbed it and turned it off. I didn't want to hear from her. I didn't want to see her. What could she possibly say that would make any of this better? Sorry? It was too late for sorry. Eventually, the anger faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I couldn't sit in that parking lot forever, though. My kids were at my mom's, and I didn't want them to think something was wrong. They didn't deserve that. They deserved a dad who had it together, even if it was all just a front. I drove back to the house slowly, dreading what I'd find when I got there. The lights were still on, and Julie's car was in the driveway. For a moment, I thought about turning around and leaving again, but I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. When I walked in, Julie was sitting on the couch, her phone in her lap and her face pale. She looked up the moment the door opened, her eyes wide and filled with something that might have been guilt. "Mark," she said, standing up. I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I don't want to hear whatever excuse you're about to come up with. Just don't." She froze, her mouth half open, like she didn't know what to say. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." "Find out what, Julie?" I asked, my anger bubbling up again. "Find out that you've been sneaking around behind my back? How long has this been going on?" She looked down, twisting the wedding ring on her finger. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, really? Because what I think is that I walked into our bedroom and found my wife with another man. So why don't you explain what it is, Julie? Enlighten me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat back down on the couch, her shoulders slumping like all the fight had gone out of her. It's been a few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months," I repeated, letting the words sink in. "Jesus, Julie." I ran a hand through my hair, pacing back and forth. "Why? Why would you do this?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I've been feeling so disconnected. From you, from us. It's like we've been living separate lives, and I didn't know how to fix it. So your solution was to cheat on me?" I snapped, stopping in my tracks to glare at her. To sneak around with some guy instead of talking to me? Instead of trying to work on whatever was wrong? "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. It happened. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth." I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for it to happen. That's the best you've got?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at the floor, while I stood there, trying to decide if I should scream or walk out the door. "Who is he?" I asked finally, my voice low and cold. "Mark, it doesn't matter." "It matters to me." I cut her off. "Who is he?" She hesitated for a moment before finally answering. "His name is Adam." He's someone I met through work. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Adam, I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. Does he know you're married? That you have kids? She flinched at that, but nodded. Yes, he knows. Of course he does, I said, more to myself than to her. And I'm guessing that didn't bother him much, did it? Mark, I'm sorry, she said again, tears streaming down her face now. I know I've hurt you, and I know I can't take it back, but I need you to know that I still love you. I never stopped loving you. I stared at her, my chest tight and my head spinning. I didn't know what to believe anymore, didn't know if I could trust a single word that came out of her mouth. All I knew was that the woman sitting in front of me wasn't the Julie I thought I knew. I can't do this right now, I said finally, my voice breaking. I need space. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room, disoriented and groggy from a night of tossing and turning. For a second, I forgot why I was there, but the weight in my chest quickly reminded me. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Julie over and over in my head. Her excuses, her apologies. It all felt hollow. Every word she'd said only solidified what I already knew. There was no going back to the way things were. The house was eerily quiet when I finally forced myself out of bed. The kids were still at my mom's, and Julie was nowhere to be seen. I wasn't sure if she'd gone out or if she was just hiding in the bedroom, but I didn't care enough to check. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the backyard. It looked the same as it always did. Liam's old soccer ball sitting in the grass, Emma's chalk drawing still visible on the patio, but it felt different now. It felt like a lie. I heard Julie come down the stairs about an hour later. Her footsteps were hesitant, like she was testing the waters, unsure if I'd explode the moment I saw her. I stayed where I was, not looking up as she walked into the kitchen. "Morning," she said softly, her voice tentative. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The sound of her voice was like nails on a chalkboard. "Mark," she tried again, taking a step closer. "Can we talk? Please." I finally looked at her, my expression blank. What's left to say? She swallowed hard, her hands fidgeting nervously. I want to explain. I know you don't want to hear it, but I need to say it." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "Fine. Explain." She hesitated, like she didn't know where to start. "I wasn't looking for it, Mark," she said finally. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. But things between us have been strained for a while, and I felt so alone. Adam was just someone who listened, someone who made me feel seen." "Seen?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You have a husband, Julie. Someone who's been here, every day, doing everything he can to keep this family together. But you needed Adam to feel seen? Do you even hear yourself?" "I know how it sounds," she said quickly, her voice rising. "I know I've made mistakes, but it wasn't just about him. It was about us, Mark. About how distant we've been." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Don't try to put this on me. Don't act like this is something we both did. You made a choice, Julie. You decided to go behind my back instead of talking to me." "I tried to talk to you," she snapped, her voice breaking. "I've been trying for years, but you never listened. You were always too busy with work, too focused on everything else. I felt like I didn't matter anymore." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But another part of me, a part one didn't want to admit existed, wondered if there was some truth to what she was saying. Had I been so caught up in everything else that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me? "I never stopped caring," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "I never stopped loving you, Julie. If you felt like you didn't matter, then that's on me. But you could have told me. You could have fought for us instead of running to someone else." She looked down, her hands trembling. "I know," she whispered. "I know I should have. And I hate myself for what I've done. But I'm here now, Mark. I'm here, and I'm ready to fight for us. I just need to know if you are too." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her that I was done, that I couldn't do this anymore. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not yet. I don't know, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But for the kids' sake, I'll stay. At least for now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I'm asking for. Just a chance. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know if I was staying because I believed her, or because I didn't know how to leave. The next few weeks were awkward, to say the least. We fell into a routine that felt more like a business partnership than a marriage. We talked about schedules, about the kids, about who was cooking dinner, or picking up groceries, but nothing else. The elephant in the room, her betrayal, hung between us, unspoken but always there. Julie started therapy on her own, something she said she wanted to do to work on herself. She asked me to join her for couples counseling, but I couldn't bring myself to go. I wasn't ready to sit in a room and talk about what she'd done, to dig into the pain I was barely holding together. Instead, I threw myself into work. I took on extra projects, stayed late at the office, and said yes to every opportunity that came my way. It was easier to focus on spreadsheets and deadlines than to deal with the mess waiting for me at home. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the anger and resentment never went away. Every time I saw Julie, I couldn't stop myself from wondering if she was really as sorry as she claimed to be. And every time her phone buzzed, my chest tightened, even though she swore she'd cut off all contact with Adam. One night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself standing outside the guest room, staring at the closed door. I'd moved in there after everything came out, unable to sleep next to her. I could hear her moving around in the bedroom, probably getting ready for bed. For a moment, I thought about knocking, about trying to have an honest conversation. But the thought of it made my stomach churn. I turned and walked away, my chest heavy with the weight of everything I couldn't say. As the days passed, the distance between Julie and me seemed to grow wider, even though we were still living under the same roof. She was trying. I'll give her that. She started asking me about my day, cooking dinner more often, and going out of her way to be present with the kids. But it all felt forced. Like she was ticking boxes on a checklist to prove that she was a better wife, a better person. I could see the strain in her eyes every time I gave her a short answer or avoided her attempts to start a conversation. She wanted me to meet her halfway, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, the image of her sitting on our bed with Adam flashed in my mind. It was like a brick wall I couldn't get around, no matter how much I tried. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Julie approached me while I was in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. "Mark," she said quietly, standing a few feet away like she wasn't sure if she should come closer. I didn't look up. "What?" "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I sighed, setting my phone down. "About what, Julie?" "About us," she said, sitting down on the armrest of the couch. "About where we go from here." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "What's there to talk about? I told you I'm here for the kids. That hasn't changed." Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. But she took a deep breath and pushed through it. "That's not enough, Mark. We can't live like this, ignoring each other, pretending everything's fine in front of the kids, but barely speaking otherwise. It's not healthy. For us or for them." I rubbed a hand over my face, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. "What do you want me to say, Julie? That I forgive you? That I'm ready to pretend like none of this ever happened? Because I can't. I don't know if I'll ever be able to." "I'm not asking you to pretend," she said softly. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke something between us that might never be fixed. But I need to know if you're willing to try. Because if you're not, if you've already made up your mind that this is over, then we need to be honest about that. With each other. With the kids." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For weeks, I've been trying to avoid this exact conversation, hoping that if I just stayed quiet and focused on the kids, I wouldn't have to make a decision. But she was right. This limbo we were in wasn't fair to anyone, least of all the kids. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can move past this, Julie. Every time I think about what you did, It feels like I'm being stabbed in the chest all over again. And the worst part is, I don't even know if I want to try. Part of me thinks it'd be easier to just let it go, to walk away. She nodded slowly, her hands gripping the fabric of her jeans tightly. I understand, she said, and if that's what you decide, I won't fight you on it. I'll take responsibility for what I've done, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for the kids. Hearing her say that, her willingness to step aside if that's what I wanted, stirred something in me. I didn't know if it was guilt or regret or something else entirely, but it left me feeling conflicted in a way I couldn't explain. I need more time, I said finally. I can't make a decision right now. I need to figure out what I want, what's best for me and the kids. Okay, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Take all the time you need. Just promise me that when you do make a decision, you'll tell me. I don't want to keep living like this, Mark. Neither of us does. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything else. She stood up, hesitated for a moment like she wanted to say more, and then walked out of the room. For the next few days, her words played on a loop in my mind. Every time I looked at the kids, I wondered what was best for them. Would staying together, even if it was only for their sake, give them the stability they needed? Or would they eventually see through the facade and realize that their parents were just two people stuck in a broken marriage? My therapist had told me once that kids are more perceptive than we give them credit for. They pick up on tension, on unspoken arguments, even when we think we're hiding it well. The last thing I wanted was for Liam and Emma to grow up in a house filled with resentment and bitterness. But I didn't want to tear their world apart either. One night, as I was tucking Liam into bed, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes of his and said, "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy laugh anymore?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "You used to laugh all the time," he said, his little forehead scrunching up. "Now you just look sad." My chest tightened, and I had to swallow the lump that had suddenly formed in my throat. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad, Liam," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean we don't love you and Emma." "Okay." He nodded, but the way he looked at me, like he didn't quite believe me, stayed with me long after I left his room. That night, as I sat alone in the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing them. I was so caught up in my own pain and anger that I hadn't stopped to think about how all of this was affecting them. They deserved better. Better than this limbo. Better than two parents pretending to be okay when they weren't. The question was, could I give them that? And if I couldn't, what came next? A few days after Liam's question, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. It stayed with me like a weight pressing down on my chest. I kept picturing his face, how confused he looked, how he could tell something was wrong even when I thought we were hiding it so well. Kids are sharper than we give them credit for. I knew then that I couldn't keep dragging things out, living in this limbo that was slowly pulling all of us under. But deciding what to do was another story. Some part of me wanted to believe that Julie and I could fix this, that we could find our way back to the love we once had. I kept thinking about the early days of our relationship, the late-night talks, the road trips, the way we'd laugh so hard we'd cry. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it had belonged to two completely different people. And maybe it did. Another part of me was tired. Tired of the hurt, the anger, the endless doubt. Even if we tried, I didn't know if I'd ever be able to trust her again. Every time her phone buzzed or she left the house, I'd wonder if she was lying. And I hated that feeling. I hated what it was turning me into. A bitter, paranoid version of myself that I barely recognized. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself sitting in the living room with Julie again. She was on the other end of the couch, scrolling through her phone, but she wasn't really looking at it. I could tell she was just pretending to be busy, waiting for me to say something. I took a deep breath, staring at the coffee table in front of me. "We can't keep doing this," I said finally. She looked up, her face tense. "What do you mean?" "This," I said, gesturing between us. "Living like roommates. Pretending everything's fine when it's not. It's not fair to the kids, and it's not fair to us." Her shoulders sagged, and she set her phone down. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been trying, Mark. I really have. But I don't know what else to do if you won't talk to me." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I understood where she was coming from. I've been thinking a lot about what Liam said, I told her. About how he noticed we don't laugh anymore. He's right. We don't. And I don't think we're doing him or Emma any favors by staying together if this is what our marriage looks like now. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Are you saying you want a divorce? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm saying I don't see another way, I said honestly. I've tried, Julie. I've tried to push past this, to forgive you, but I don't think I can. And I don't think it's fair to you, or to me to keep pretending like I can. The tears spilled over then, and she wiped them away quickly, trying to keep herself together. I don't want to give up on us, she said, her voice cracking. But if this is what you need, I'll respect it. I don't want to make this harder than it already is. Hearing her say that, a part of me hated how much it hurt, because deep down, I didn't want to give up on us either. But I also knew I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already broken. We sat in silence for a long time after that, neither of us knowing what to say. It felt like the end of something, but also the beginning of something else, something we couldn't fully see yet. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics. We told the kids as gently as we could, explaining that Mommy and Daddy were going to live in different houses, but that we both loved them very much. Liam cried, and Emma asked a lot of questions that I struggled to answer. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Julie found an apartment a few miles away, close enough that the kids could easily go back and forth. We worked out a custody schedule, dividing our time with them as equally as possible. On paper, it all seemed simple, but in reality, it was anything but. The first night the kids stayed at Julie's place, the house felt impossibly empty. I sat in the living room, staring at their toys scattered across the floor, and felt a wave of sadness that nearly knocked the air out of me. This wasn't the life I'd pictured for them, for any of us, but it was the life we had now, and I had to figure out how to make it work. I threw myself into work again, but this time it wasn't just an escape. I started saying yes to opportunities one would have turned down before. Networking events, new projects, even a promotion that came with more responsibility. It wasn't just about staying busy anymore. It was about building something for myself, something that wasn't tied to the wreckage of my marriage. Outside of work, I started focusing on the kids more. When they were with me, I made a point to be fully present, to play with them, listen to their stories, and make sure they knew how much I loved them. They were my anchor through all of this, the one thing that kept me grounded. Julie and I kept things civil. We didn't have long, emotional conversations or try to dissect what went wrong anymore. We just co-parented. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the kids, if nothing else. One evening, about 2 months after she moved out, I ran into her at Liam's soccer game. She was sitting on the sidelines, cheering him on, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But when she turned and saw me, the awkwardness hit us both at the same time. "Hey," she said, giving me a small smile. "Hey," I replied, sitting down a few feet away from her. We made small talk during the game, about the kids, mostly. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sure if I'd forgiven her, but the bitterness I'd been holding on to was gone. That night, as I sat at home, I realized something else. I didn't hate Julie. I didn't even resent her anymore. I just felt sad for what we'd lost. But that sadness wasn't consuming me like it used to. It was just there, like a dull ache in the background. I didn't know what the future held, for me, for Julie, or for the kids. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. And that was enough for now. A few months after that soccer game, life began to feel normal. Not the old normal, the one where I lived under the illusion that everything was fine, but a new kind of normal, one I was learning to accept. Julie and I had settled into our roles as co-parents, and while it wasn't perfect, it worked. The kids were adjusting better than I'd expected. Liam started smiling more, Emma stopped asking so many questions, and the house didn't feel as heavy when they were with me. Work was going well. The promotion I'd taken turned out to be a bigger challenge than I anticipated, but it pushed me in a way I hadn't felt in years. For once, I felt like I was building something just for me. I'd even started going out with friends again, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. Then one day, out of the blue, Julie called me. We usually communicated through texts or quick exchanges when dropping off the kids, so hearing her voice on the phone was unexpected. "Hey, Mark," she said, sounding hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" I frowned, unsure where this was going. "Yeah, what's up?" I wanted to let you know I've been offered a new job," she said. "It's in Portland." That caught me off guard. "Portland? As in, you're moving?" She sighed. "Maybe. I haven't made a decision yet, but it's a good opportunity. More money, better hours, and I think it'd be good for me to start fresh." I didn't know what to say. Part of me understood where she was coming from. Hell, I'd thought about moving away myself more than once. But the thought of her leaving, of the kids being split between 2 states, sent a wave of panic through me. "What about Liam and Emma?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not leaving them, Mark," she said quickly. "If I take the job, I want to talk about a plan that works for all of us. Maybe they could stay with you during the school year and visit me during breaks. I don't know. I wanted to be upfront with you before I made any decisions." I leaned back in my chair, processing what she was saying. It wasn't an easy conversation to have, but for the first time, I realized how much she'd changed since the divorce. She wasn't running away from responsibility anymore. She was trying to handle this the right way. "I appreciate you telling me," I said after a moment, "but we'd have to really think this through. It's not just about us. It's about what's best for them." "I know," she said. "That's why I wanted to talk to you first. I don't want to do anything that hurts them." We left it at that, agreeing to sit down and talk in person once she had more details about the job. But the call stayed with me for days. It forced me to confront something I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. I didn't want Julie back, but I didn't hate her either. In some strange way, I wanted her to be happy. Maybe that's what moving on really looked like. A week later, we met at a coffee shop to discuss the logistics of her potential move. It wasn't easy, but we worked through it together, making sure the kids would still have stability no matter where Julie ended up. By the end of the meeting, I felt lighter, like we were finally on the same page, working towards something instead of against each other. As I was leaving, she stopped me at the door. "Mark," she said, her voice soft, "I just want to say thank you. For everything. For being a great dad, for being patient with me, even when I didn't deserve it." I nodded, not sure how to respond. "Take care of yourself, Julie," I said finally. She smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. "You too." Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't feel angry or bitter. I felt free. A few months later, Julie officially took the job and moved to Portland. The kids adjusted to the new arrangement better than I could have hoped. They stayed with me during the school year and spent summers and holidays with her. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for them, or for me, but it worked. As for me, I kept moving forward. I poured myself into work, into the kids, into building a life I could be proud of. And somewhere along the way, I found myself again. I'm not going to say everything is perfect now. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That's enough.